Welcome to the Way of the Lion Narnian Apologetics course. We've already tackled The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe with reference to truth claims, logic and the gospel. We've also discussed Prince Caspian's oppressive education and the importance of worldview thinking. In this third session on Prince Caspian, we will be discussing worldview analysis. Our aims for this session are to assess different worldviews using the terms we defined in the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe sessions. That is, internal contradictions, or the test of coherence, contradictions with the external world, or the test of correspondence, and a brief discussion of evidence and authority for a worldview. And now a brief disclaimer. There are two approaches that will be employed in this video: apologetics and polemics. As we are familiar with, apologetics means defending the Christian worldview. In apologetics, we only have to know what our own worldview says, like someone studying a real banknote to be able to spot a fraud. Polemics is more like going on the offensive. In polemics, it is equally important to know what other worldviews believe, so we can analyse and find the contradictions in worldview components. Both are exemplified in the Bible, notably in Acts 17:16-23. Here I quote: "While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, 'What is this babbler trying to say?' Others remarked, 'He seems to be advocating foreign gods.' They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, 'May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean.' All the Athenians and foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, 'People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For, as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription: To an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you.' Paul reasoned with Jews according to their faith, verse 17, but used aspects of Greek religion to convey the gospel to the Areopagus, verse 23. In verse 28, he even references pagan poets to point people towards God. Similarly, we should be gentle as doves, but wise as serpents. Other way round in Scripture. Matthew 10:16. And know our audience. It is also a mark of respect to our friend to try and understand what they believe and not attack straw men. Thus, before we start this material, I wish to offer this disclaimer, that though this includes some polemics, I'm not trying or wishing to be unnecessarily offensive. If you are offended by anything in this video, please comment and I will do my best to respond with respect and Christian love. Last time we learned about worldviews. We learned that it comes from the German Weltansicht and that it colours your values, behaviour and culture. We also learned that it consists of your beliefs about 5 main areas: morality, human value, creation, purpose and God. We also said that every person has one and how important it is to have a well-defined and thought-out picture of reality. This time, we're going to analyse a variety of worldview positions and challenge certain beliefs inherent in them. Once one has established that you and your candidate have a worldview, you can begin to analyse them and assess whether they hold together. In most cases, there will be contradictions, assumptions, and logical fallacies at the heart of the various categories and the interaction between them. Exposing these and asking people to reassess their positions can open them to critically assessing the world around them. Once they are thinking logically and rationally, they are on God's turf, as Lewis articulates in his brilliant book, Miracles. In the subject of contradictions, there are two main measures of truth, as we addressed in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe section: coherence and correspondence. If a worldview has internal contradictions, then it is incoherent and must be reviewed. If it has contradiction with the external world, then it is not correspondent and must be reviewed. Together, we're going to look at a few common areas of contention and see if we can put them right. Let's start with internal and self-contradictions, that is, the subject of coherence. The Nazi Holocaust is widely regarded as one of the worst evils man has perpetrated against man in history. The instigators of this were famously tried in the Nuremberg trials. These trials were nearly halted by the clever lawyers defending the high-ranking Nazi leadership. They said that since what they were doing was legal and socially acceptable in their country at that time, the trials were unjust and illegal. Many people have self-contradicting worldviews, such as believing in absolute right and wrong. For example, industrialized slaughter of men, women and children on ethnic grounds is absolutely wrong, and yet claiming that morality is defined by society. The Holocaust happened in a Nazi society which thought it was right. The Allied lawyer continued the trial on the grounds that there is a law above the law, to which even the Third Reich was responsible. Others believe that there is no God, and human life is just an aberrant cosmic accident, and yet they live as though they have a purpose. Their species have innate value, and as if there is an absolute right and wrong. This is self-contradictory, and yet very common. Let's take examples from some different worldviews: Pantheism, Naturalism, Post-Modernism, Deism, and Nihilism. Starting with Pantheism, which includes Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and New Age thought. Broadly speaking, Pantheism is the belief that God is everything and everything is God. In the West, Pantheism originated as a worldview in the mid-17th century, but aspects existed in ancient forms of Hinduism since 1000 BC. Philosopher Spinoza westernized it when he argued against Descartes' dualist theory of a separate body and spirit. It gained popularity in the West in the 1960s and 70s thanks to celebrities such as the Beatles and films such as Star Wars. It insists upon an impersonal God and impersonal soul. However, karma acts like a moral personal being that judges an individual being, determining success and failure, and in what form a person should be reincarnated. Improving one's karma is not love for another's sake, but is self-serving. Techniques leading to the One require actions like chanting and meditation, but they are professed illusions themselves, and therefore ultimately meaningless. Thus one can never reach nirvana, become part of the one, or be saved. Salvation is something that every soul longs for, and which only Christ can offer. Deism. Deism evolved in the 17th century as Christian theism became chaotic and quarrelsome between denominations. Many of America's founding fathers were deists. The basic belief is that God existed, or possibly exists, created the world and natural laws, then, having set the whole show in progress, retreated from any interaction with it. Authority and knowledge shifts from God to humanity. It is an inconsistent and unstable worldview. The ethical system is illogical since they claim nothing is inherently right or wrong. Knowledge works outward from the empirical specifics to general, universal truths. However, no human can understand enough specifics to draw confident conclusions about the general. Humans can't be significant or have individuality in a closed universe. This is determinism, which leads to apathy and hopelessness. By the 18th century, deism was virtually abandoned because of too many conflicting and untenable positions. The danger is that deism proved to be a transitional worldview between theism and naturalism. Naturalism, as adopted by Dr. Dawkins and the New Atheists, as well as existentialists and agnostics, modern naturalism evolved between the 17th and 18th centuries. Its strongest assertions are that matter is all that matters, and reason is the sole basis for truth. There are numerous logical inconsistencies in this worldview, including circular reasoning of complexity of matter, as you can hear when David Attenborough uses design language when referring to evolution. A determinist view based on inexorable cause and effect, but insists upon free will. Stephen Hawking observed that free will is an illusion, but we have no choice but to pretend that it was real. He wrote in Black Holes and Baby Universes and Other Essays, 1993, page 133 to 135, and I quote, "It may be that everything we do is determined by some grand unified theory. If that theory has determined that we shall die by hanging, then we shall not drown. But you would have to be awfully sure that you were destined for the gallows to put to sea in a small boat during a storm. I have noticed that even people who claim everything is predetermined and that we can do nothing to change it, look before they cross the road." One cannot base one's conduct on the idea that everything is determined, because one does not know what has been determined. Instead, one has to adopt the effective theory that one has free will, and that one is responsible for one's actions. This theory is not very good at predicting human behaviour, but we adopt it because there is no chance of solving the equations arising from the fundamental laws." End quote. Without free will, there can be no morality, since every action we take is predetermined. That there are many moral atheists is a major contradiction to the worldview, which does not allow for any moral foundations. Extinction at death poses a major problem regarding any sense of purpose. There is no tenable explanation for the origins of the universe, let alone life. These major contradictions and imperfections make naturalism an untenable position to hold while employing reason. Lewis called it a boy's philosophy. Christianity, by contrast, offers the grand unified theory that Hawking et al. Was seeking. Post-modernism. Post-modernism has similarities to naturalism and existentialism. It evolved in the mid-20th century and is marked by a pluralism of perspectives and a plethora of philosophical possibilities. This came about by a breakdown in previous confidence in the meta-narratives, or grand stories, which are overarching explanations for life and reality, such as human reason, power structures, political and religious ideologies. Its defining concepts include relativism, absence of truth, and anti-ideologies. Relativism fails at morality, as we saw at Nuremberg. Denying truth fails at the point of living it out, since we all have to believe that some things, such as the law of gravity, etc., are true, to plan for our day not floating away. Defining oneself by what we stand against is an entirely negative and damaging way of life. Though few stories have absolute corresponding truth, meta-narratives are meaningful and useful. The rejection of any and all meta-narratives is itself a meta-narrative. The proposition that we can't know reality but only tell stories about it is self-referential. Using language to claim that language is indeterminate is a paradox. Claiming that human reason and certitude is insufficient rests on the sufficiency and certainty of human reason. All these positions are contradictory, but gained acceptance in contemporary society. It is a house built on sand. Thankfully, this position seems to be dissipating, creating a philosophical vacuum which Christianity can fill satisfyingly. Nihilism. Nihilism evolved in the late 18th century. Friedrich Nietzsche is mostly credited with founding nihilism, and he wrote the damaging statement that God is dead, as we discussed in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe section. Nihilism is the logical conclusion of all worldviews except theism. It is characterized by the denial of everything, absence of meaning, and nothingness. Logic and reason are not provable, thus its position cannot be rationally argued. The closed universe is boxed in, which is inconclusive without outside measurement or comparison. Extinction, though psychologically unsettling, is inescapable, but allows no room for justice. Chance is offered as a means for free will, but that's not possible in a closed system. Knowledge, meaning, and ethics are also boxed in and can't be proven without outside measurement or comparison. Nihilism denies the meaning of everything, including art, yet its strongest adherents are artists and writers. The sign I've put up here, "Nihilist lives don't matter," is of course tongue-in-cheek, but it is what they themselves believe. Christianity can offer a much more fulfilling and life-affirming position, which has the added advantage of being true. External contradictions, that is, the test of correspondence. For a belief to be true, it must correspond to the state of affairs that obtains. I may believe fervently that Ulaanbaatar is the capital of Bulgaria, but that will not stop the people who live there speaking Mongolian. Similarly, I may deny the existence of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, but they will still take tax from me. These beliefs, however sincerely held, do not correspond with the real world and are therefore not true. In similar vein to the Coherence section, let's assess 5 components from 5 worldviews and measure them against known external sources, such as science and history. Last time we assessed philosophical positions. This time we're going to be fair and assess competing religious worldviews, specifically Islam and ancient history, Hinduism and the beginning of the universe, Buddhism and the concept of meaning, Naturalistic Atheism and the Beginning of Life, and Mormonism and early American history. We will consider world religions in more detail when we discuss Horse and His Boy, so this is a very rough pencil sketch, not intended to be comprehensive. Islam. The Holy Book of Islam, the Quran, declares, "And for there, the Jews, saying, Indeed, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. And they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but another was made to resemble him to them. And indeed, those who differ over it are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it, except the following of assumption. And they did not kill him, for certain." To believe this denial of the crucifixion, one has to discount all the eyewitness and first century testimony to this event, such as John 15:21, Tacitus, Josephus, the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin, every serious historical scholar of the period, including Church of Scotland scholar James Dunn, radical skeptic Bart Ehrman, historian Gary Habermas, historian Paula Fredrickson, to name but a few. Many more sources on this topic are listed in the McDowell boys' excellent book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Even Jesus' own testimony stands against this. John 20:27. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." In response to this, the best Islam can say is that our scriptures have been corrupted, despite us having extant copies of the New Testament predating the supposed writing of the Quran by several centuries. If this latter claim were true, then the Quran would be false, since Muslims are told to judge by our scriptures in the Quran, Surah 10:94, Surah 3:3-4, Surah 5:47 and 68. And if false, then the Quran is false, because it contradicts our scriptures. This is known in some circles as the Islamic dilemma, and I have yet to hear a reasonable defense against it from inside Islam. If you are the one who can refute it, then please do so in the comments section, and I will address it in another video. So, since we can see that the Quran is historically false in this respect, as it also is in the case of Alexander the Great travelling so far west that he found a place where the sun set. For the record, that was in a pool of muddy water with a people living near. And confusing Mary, the mother of Christ, with Miriam, the sister of Moses, and confusing Haman's date by 1,000 years and location between Egypt and Babylon, we can confidently conclude that Islam fails the test of external correspondence. By contrast, we find every detail of the New Testament record to be stunningly accurate, including names, dates, and places. Hinduism. Throughout the history of the world, there have been ideas about the eternality of matter. Great minds such as Aristotle have hypothesized that the material universe is eternal and has always been there. There are others who claim that it had a beginning. Astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle, on the 29th of March 1949, sought to ridicule the idea of a beginning to space-time by giving it the name the Big Bang Theory. His reason for this was that allowing a beginning to the universe, as Monseigneur Lemaitre was saying, allowed a divine foot in the door. The Big Bang Theory is the one held by the majority of scientists today, with the steady state theory rapidly becoming as outcast as the flat earth theory. The anti-theistic stance held back science for many years, while free Christian theologians were able to work on the theory. The matter is as close as we can be to being settled now, thanks to the Borde-Guter-Vilenkin theorem, which offers compelling evidence that for the beginning of space-time. Hinduism is one religious worldview that holds that the material universe is eternal, specifically eternally reincarnating. Hugh Ross, of Reasons to Believe, claims that this is impossible on two fronts. The Hindu Vedas state that the universe goes through an infinite number of cycles of birth, deaths, and rebirths, where the cyclical period is 4.32 billion years. Since there is an overwhelming evidence that the universe has been continually expanding for 13.79, give or take 0.05 billion years, the Vedas are incorrect about the universe lasting only 4.32 billion years. They are also mistaken about the universe being able to restart itself. The universe lacks by a factor of 100 million times the necessary low enough entropy measure to permit the possibility of a future restart or rebound. Biblical cosmology is continually being proven right, from the earth hanging on nothing, that's Job 26:7, right down to Oort clouds, Job 38:22. I am the only person I've ever heard talking about Oort clouds in Job, so this might just be my pet theory. But it's possible. Buddhism. Buddhism is a beautiful atheistic or pantheistic religious philosophy which became very popular in the West in the late 20th century among celebrities and wealthy people. Ironically, it is a striving to achieve nothingness, that is nirvana, in an attempt to rid oneself of possessions, desires, and thus suffering. This is done by a particular type of meditation, to empty oneself of desires, as opposed to Christian meditation, filling oneself with God's truth and spirit. The highest goal or desire of Buddhism is to extinguish desires or goals. Thus, if one were to achieve this target, then there would no longer be a target that they had met, and it would all be meaningless and a waste of life. The Buddhist response to this is that enlightenment is only achieved in a realm beyond logic and reason. It is a metaphysical mystery, though it is impossible to distinguish between this mystery and incoherence. For this and a few other reasons, it is rational to reject Buddhism, despite its beauty and celebrity following. Christianity is a no less beautiful Eastern religion, which offers an intellectually fulfilling form of meditation and delivers unsurpassable peace. Naturalistic atheism. This is a religiously held belief system which, at its heart, holds evolution in the place of God. Before we go further, let me define evolution in 3 ways and show which one I'm referring to. Evolution 1 means change over time, something that is scientifically beyond doubt and biblically affirmed by Genesis 1. Evolution 2 is the belief in a common ancestor, that is, that humans and animals came from the same biological root. This is supportable with some circumstantial evidence and a lot of assumptions, and can be held in tandem with the Bible with a little in reinterpretation. I don't wish to challenge that here. We might touch on it in Book 6, The Magician's Nephew. Evolution 3 is where the problem lies. This is the belief that evolution can explain not only biodiversity, but biological life itself. This calls for abiogenesis, that is, life coming from non-life. Not only has this never been observed, the odds against it happening are so astronomically small that it would involve a miracle. Belief in a miracle without God is standing with your feet firmly planted in mid-air, as Ravi Zacharias likes to quote. After a certain factor of unlikeliness, scientists and mathematicians equate it with impossible. The idea of abiogenesis surpasses that by an impressive factor. As two disappointed atheists wrote, I quote, "Life cannot have had a random beginning. The trouble is that there are about 2,000 enzymes, and the chance of obtaining them all in a random trial is only 1 part in 10 to the 40,000th power, an outrageously small probability that could not be faced even if the whole universe consisted of organic soup. If one is not prejudiced either by social beliefs or by a scientific training into the conviction that life originated on the earth, this simple calculation wipes the idea entirely out of court. The enormous information content of even the simplest living systems cannot, in our view, be generated by what are often called natural processes. For life to have originated on the earth, it would be necessary that quite explicit instruction should have been provided for its assembly. There is no way in which we can expect to avoid the need for information. No way in which we can simply get by with a bigger and better organic soup, as we ourselves hoped might be possible a year or two ago. Those instructions they refer to are the discovery of DNA and RNA, which can by no means be explained by purely chemical processes, but demands an intelligence in the design of living cells, and the belief in evolution 3 becomes impossible. As William Lane Craig says, it is worse than magic. At least in magic there is a magician with a hat. Here they just want a rabbit to appear in a vacuum. Mormonism, that is, the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, or Mormons, are a pseudo-Christian cult from America. Their beliefs rest on the testimony of a self-professed prophet called Joseph Smith Jr., whose dates are 1805 to 1844. Like his father, Smith Sr., Joseph was an occultist who made money by claiming to be able to find hidden treasure by means of inducing a trance. After numerous arrests for fraud, he took a new tack. While in his treasure-hunting trance, he located a golden book, which he then dug up and ran back home with, despite the incredible weight a book such as he described would have weighed. He used his occultic practices to translate this book from Reformed Egyptian to King James English, before it was taken up to heaven, leaving no trace, conveniently. If you've never heard of Reformed Egyptian, then you are in the company of the world's most respected anthropologists and linguists, because it never existed. This became known as the Book of Mormon. It teaches that God was once a man, and that we, like him, can become gods of our own planets. It is radically polytheistic, having more gods than any other pantheon in history. None of this gives us a coercive reason to reject Mormonism, but when we lie the claims of the Book of Mormon alongside archaeology, anthropology, and American prehistory, we find enormous contradiction and zero corroborating evidence. The book's failure is in its detail. It gives names and locations of Native American tribes that never existed, dates and locations of enormous battles that never happened, and a quite ludicrous history of America being colonized and by Hebrews centuries before the Vikings, let alone Columbus. It describes metalwork and animal husbandry centuries before what the archaeological record suggests. It is almost obligatory to view Smith as a con man and false prophet in the light of the Book of Abraham. This is his translation of a genuine Egyptian text which his community bought at enormous cost. It forms a part of the Mormon scripture today, even though the original has been discovered, analysed by post-Rosetta Stone Egyptologists, and declared to be a part of the Book of the Dead and in no way related to Abraham or his descendants. Even the illustrations that he copied from the damaged scroll were fancifully embellished with no obvious knowledge of Egyptian culture and conventions, such as the missing jackal head of Anubis, the god of death, being replaced by Smith with the head of a man. Smith's work is one of religious fiction and must be discounted. It is in no way comparable to the wealth of evidence which backs up the Christian scriptures. All beliefs have a beginning. All beliefs deserve to be supported by authoritative evidence. It is only reasonable to believe in fairies, for example, if you have seen them on many occasions with other sane people who saw the same thing. If you read a book of fairy stories and see some fake photos, then that is not good evidence, and you remain rational by disbelieving in fairies. There are, of course, different types of knowledge, and each type of knowledge will have different types of evidence. Scientific evidence will need to be empirical in nature and based on consistently repeatable experiments. Historical evidence will be the testimony of eyewitnesses and people close to the event. And philosophical evidence will include beliefs and motives of the people involved, meaning of the events beyond the mundane, and theological matters. Your worldview will need to consider all these types of knowledge and decide if the authority you believe in is reliable. In a court of law, evidence is presented by either the defence or prosecution, weighed and tested by the opposing position, and then assessed and judged by the jury or magistrate. I recommend watching daytime TV, such as Judge Judy, or courtroom dramas such as Perry Mason, to watch how evidence is assessed. On such evidence, people can be sentenced to prison, and even to death in some cultures. These lawyers might present DNA or fingerprint evidence, eyewitness testimony or motive for the crime. The same courtroom rigour should be applied to questions of worldview authority. For example, the resurrection is pivotal and should be addressed. The evidence supporting it is laid out in a comprehensive format by Josh and Sean McDowell in their book Evidence That Demands a Verdict, 2017. They present theological evidence in the matter of fulfilled prophecy from the Old Testament and Jesus himself, historical evidence from eyewitnesses such as Peter and John, and those close to them such as Clement of Rome, AD 95, Ignatius, AD 107, and Polycarp, AD 110. They then forensically investigate the resurrection scene, if you will, the scene of the anti-crime, from known facts before and after the event. Prior facts include medical and historical assurance of Jesus' death, the location and type of tomb, contextual burial practices, and the guard. Subsequent facts include the empty tomb reported by women, then corroborated by the apostles, and never questioned by the earliest anti-Christian rhetoric. The grave clothes, the 12 appearances of the risen Christ, and the lack of early refutation. They also assess the accounts in terms of historical, psychological, and sociological factors. And finally, they cross-examine some alternative theories that have been put forth over the centuries, such as the apparent death theory, the theft theory, and, my favourite for sheer absurdity, the mass hallucination theory. I recommend this tome for similarly detailed analysis of evidence for and against the Bible, Jesus, the Old and New Testaments, and even truth itself. And now it's your turn. Thinking of the apologetic conversations that you have already had, either over this course or before it, can you think of any examples of contradictory worldviews? Think it over, discuss with a friend, and then I will give you some of my own examples. Pause the video now. Okay, some of my ideas. I was once training for a job at a care home, and my trainer gave her prepared spiel about the sanctity of life. Then, moments later, over coffee, she declared that she was in favour of the death sentence for anyone who abused children or elderly people. At an earlier job, I expressed concern about a pregnant co-worker smoking. Their friend rushed to their defence, saying, "Well, that's her choice, isn't it?" To which I agreed that this was entirely my point. Her choice, but not her child's. The defender was in favour of free choice, but only of the mother, not of the unborn infant she was carrying. I was in conversation with a friend at church who claimed confidently that morality was a social construct, but who abhorred the Holocaust and somebody cutting in front of her in the coffee queue. I hope she will watch these videos. I love her very much. I have known many people who believe themselves to be defenders of rationality and reason until rationality and reason start to challenge their own deeply held beliefs. Indeed, I have rarely found anyone with an entirely consistent worldview, including myself. For this reason, your homework will be quite an easy task. Your mission this week, should you choose to accept it, is to prepare a presentable Christian worldview and gently challenge someone else's worldview. Gently challenge. Here I must add the 1 Peter 3:15-16 caveat. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behaviour in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. Thank you for accompanying me on this brief discussion of worldview analysis. Our aims today were to assess worldview components in terms of coherence, correspondence, and authority. If we met these goals together, please consider liking the video and leaving a comment. If you would like to join me for the next book of this series, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when we will consider scriptural reliability, then don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell. If I have offended anyone in this video, then I express deep regret. I didn't make the video to offend anyone. I have been as honest and as forthright as I can be. If you are offended by it, please let me know, and I will do whatever I can to make amends without going against the truth. Until next time, blessings of Aslan on you.